guys, it's Julie Spencer, author of the Buxton Peak series. We are almost kind of close to the end of Buxton Peak Book 2, Center Stage. We are just starting into Chapter 11, which is called For the Love of Breadsticks. When Megan pulled in the Olive Garden parking lot, she realized they had a conundrum. Do they walk right in and cause a scene, or have one of the girls go in and quietly talk to a manager about helping them find a quiet corner booth where they won't be easily recognized? They decided that since this was a night all about experimenting with going out in public without bodyguards, they should just walk right in and take their chances. The guys held the girls' hands as they casually opened the door for them like gentlemen, like any other men who were out on a date with their wives. The greeter stammered. Her eyes were wide, her jaw was slack. She stopped short, causing a waitress to barrel into her, beer sloshing from a nearly overflowing glass. The waitress turned in the direction the hostess was staring and nearly dropped the tray of drinks she had balancing on her arm. The manager was nearby and didn't seem to recognize them, other than realizing his staff was visually distracted by the two incredibly handsome young men who had just walked in with one unassuming college girl and one slightly pregnant woman. "Welcome to Olive Garden." The man hesitated. "Just the four of you?" He grabbed 4 menus and stepped to the side. "How about the 6 of us?" A booming voice came from behind them. Ed and India had just walked in the door. "Wow!" Kai exclaimed when he turned around. You weren't kidding about her looking like a supermodel." Both Ian and Kai stood wide-eyed with their mouths gaping at the tall, beautiful woman who had just walked in on the arm of their bodyguard and longtime friend. "Put your tongues back in your mouth, guys," Rhonda scolded them. "She's obviously already claimed. And so are you, I might add." "Hi, India." Megan reached up and gave India a hug. "I thought you guys were going out to lunch." "We did." Ed displayed a sly grin. "I just don't think either of us wanted the date to end anytime soon, so we went shopping together and got hungry again. We were going to head over to the Chinese place over by Dick's Sporting Goods, but saw 2 familiar cars pull into the parking lot over here and decided to come crash the party." "First Wok is the best Chinese food in town," Megan said. "Looks like you'll have to have a second date so you can come back on another day." "I'm free tomorrow." Ed turned to India and raised his eyebrows. "Looks like these guys don't need my services anymore, for now." India smiled at him with a gleam in her eye. "Sounds good to me." "So there will be 6 of you then?" The manager piped in. They'd all but forgotten why they were still standing in the foyer, causing even more of a scene. "Follow me, please." The manager did indeed find them a corner booth in the side room off the main dining area. "Thank you, good sir." Ian tucked a $20 bill in the manager's hand and asked to have a very competent server dedicated to just their table. The manager looked down at the bill. Megan chuckled. A tip like that may be customary in other parts of the world, but not in rural Michigan. The manager decided to tuck the money in his pocket and move forward with seating his guests. "Are you familiar with our electronic kiosk that allows you to request refills on your beverages without even having to wait for your server?" He showed them the little computer that sat near the edge of the table. Ian glanced at it disapprovingly and picked it up off the table. "That is not what I requested, mate." He handed it to the manager. "These ladies are to be treated These ladies are to be treated like the queens that they are, please." "As you wish." The manager tilted his head slightly. "I'll go inform your server. She'll be right with you, I'm sure." "You're kind of discourteous, Ian," Megan scolded him quietly as they shuffled into the booth and got comfortable. "Yes," he smiled at her, "but I'll tip her better than any waitress has ever received in her life." He looked up and grinned as a college-age girl arrived at their table with a bottle of wine. Her eyes seemed wide and intimidated, and her hands were shaking just a little. "Welcome to the Olive Garden," she squeaked and cleared her throat. "My name's Teresa. Could I offer you a glass of wine while you're waiting for your appetizers?" "No, thank you," Ian responded, and most of the others at the table shook their heads. "I'll take some." Kai held up his glass that was already waiting on the table, but wrinkled his nose just slightly at the bottle in her hand. "But I'd much prefer a finer year than that. Do you have a nice Amarone?" The girl looked as if she might choke. Megan guessed that no one ever ordered that expensive of a wine. "Yes, sir." Teresa nodded hesitantly. We have an Amarone Bertani. Would you like that by the glass, or shall I bring you the bottle? The bottle, of course. Kai didn't seem to notice the disapproving way Rhonda glared at him. And what can I get for the rest of you? Teresa asked. They all looked down at their menus, other than Megan, who already knew she wanted a Diet Coke, of course. Root beer, India and Ian both responded and laughed together. Megan had never seen either of their eyes gleam like they were. It was endearing, and she was happy for them both. The Bilani peach raspberry iced tea sounds good, Rhonda set her menu aside. I'll have the strawberry passion fruit limonada, Ian grinned. I understand I'm quite a passionate person. He raised his eyebrows at the server and winked at Rhonda. You told him about that? Rhonda asked Megan, who shrugged her shoulders apologetically. No one else seemed to understand the confusion. Teresa continued with her well-rehearsed approach. Could I put in an appetizer for you while they're preparing your beverages? What's your favorite? Ian asked, holding open the page on the menu showing a wide selection of appetizers. I really love the Mediterranean flatbread. Teresa pointed to a delectable-looking appetizer that was piled high with elaborate display of colorful food. Then that is what I will have. Ian nodded, set his menu aside, and smiled to the others at the table. How about the rest of you? You want to share an order of calamari? India shyly suggested to Ed. Would you like that spicy or regular? He raised his eyebrows at her, and they both responded together. Spicy. Ed looked over at the server with a smile. We'll share an order of spicy calamari. She nodded back to him. I'll just have a salad, Rhonda said. Megan was reminded of the conversation with Kai outside the car and narrowed her eyes at him from across the table. He jumped in and ordered what he must have thought was Rhonda's favorite, obviously hoping she'd share with him. Shrimp scampi frita, please. He set his menu aside. The smell of that is going to make me gag, Rhonda told him. I thought you loved seafood. Kai frowned and creased his eyebrows. Not since I've been pregnant. Rhonda shook her head. I kind of thought you'd have noticed that by now. Megan sensed a tension between them she hadn't realized prior. Now she understood. Kai didn't know Rhonda well enough prior to getting pregnant to know the reason she wasn't eating was because she was nauseated. How about just some breadsticks or something? Megan suggested. That sounds good. Rhonda smiled lightly over at her. I just want salad and breadsticks too. Megan looked up at the server, who finished typing everything in and excused herself. Are you really going to drink a whole bottle of wine by yourself? Rhonda sneered at Kai. You know I can't share that with you while I'm pregnant, right? I know that, babe. He put his arm around her in consolation. Whatever I don't drink, they're going to have to throw away anyway. I might as well reimburse them for the cost. She shook her head in mild disgust and turned away just slightly. Well, at least you didn't spend $20,000 at the music store today like Ian did, Rhonda said. What on earth did you buy this time? Ed laughed over at Ian. Just a couple of guitars, Ian shrugged. You spent $20,000 on 2 guitars today? India gasped. They were really nice guitars, Ian explained as he noticed their server standing next to them with a tray of drinks. She was shaking mildly and staring down at him with wide eyes and a gaping mouth. He stood up quickly and took the tray from her. Would you like some help with that? Megan was suddenly afraid the waitress was going to either drop the tray or fall over. People didn't spend that kind of money around here unless they were putting a down payment on a house or a very nice car, and those were more likely financed. Ed stood up and pulled a chair over for her, always the sensitive and protective one. Teresa sat down hard, still staring at Ian. Are you okay? Ed asked. She nodded almost indiscernibly, took a deep breath, and gathered herself together. That just, took me by surprise. She stared at Ian. I mean, I knew that you were you, but I didn't realize. It threw me off when I first met him, too, Megan explained. You'll get used to it. Everything all right over here? The manager came over with the very expensive bottle of wine Kai had ordered. He set the bottle on the table and quickly stepped over to attend to his employee. What's wrong? Are you ill? She'll be fine, Ian said. She just had a mild panic attack, that's all. I'm very sorry about that. He and Ed helped her to her feet, and Ian assisted in passing out the drinks, expertly handing the correct selections to his friends as if he regularly served them. He smiled up at the manager apologetically and handed the tray back to the disoriented server. Do you need to go on break for a little while?" the manager asked. "We can get someone else to come over and help." "Oh, please don't take her away from us," Ian said. "She's doing a marvelous job." The young lady smiled at him gratefully. "I'll be fine now," she assured her manager, nodding her head. The manager grudgingly left with a sigh. "What are you studying in college, Teresa?" Megan asked her, trying to further comfort the young lady. "Biochemistry," Teresa said. "You're in my molecular biology class." "I am?" Megan grinned. "I'm sorry I didn't recognize you." "That's all right." Teresa glanced over at Ian. "You've been a little distracted this semester." "Is that what I am to you now, love?" Ian put his arm around Megan and leaned in close. "A distraction?" "As you told me in Copenhagen, I like this kind of distraction." "If I remember correctly," Kai reminded them, "that kind of distraction caused us to be late getting on stage that evening." Everyone at the table laughed, and Teresa kind of chuckled and smiled, as if not really sure what the joke was about. Megan realized they had inadvertently excluded Teresa from the conversation and turned back to her, drawing her back to the topic of biochemistry. "That's senior level material," Megan said. "Are you graduating next week?" "I have one more semester in the fall." Teresa shook her head with a little grin. "Not all of us make it through college in 4 years like you did." "How do you know I got through college in 4 years?" "Megan," Teresa scoffed and rolled her eyes, "you're kind of like well known in the chemistry department at CMU." "You're pretty much a nerd." Ian looked over at his wife. "Aren't you, Megan?" Teresa gasped at Ian's seemingly derogatory statement. "I warned you about that when we first met," Megan said. "You still married me. It's all your own fault you married a geek." Teresa relaxed her shoulders and smiled. "She is really smart, Mr. Taylor." "Mr. Taylor!" Ian cried. "Where is my father? Please, Teresa, call me Ian." Teresa laughed lightly at his joke and picked up Kai's $100 bottle of Amarone. She popped the cork and passed it to Kai, who barely grazed it near his face before setting it on the table dismissively. Teresa poured a sample of wine into a wide glass and handed it over to him. He glanced at it and took a small sip before nodding and handing it back to her. She filled the glass about half full, passed it back to him, and set the wine bottle on the table in front of him. "Now that you've completed your formalities," Ian sneered at Kai, "how about if we order some meals, shall we?" "I thought we already did that," Rhonda asked Megan. "Those were just the appetizers," Megan told her. "We have to go through it all over again." "Can I just stick with my breadsticks and salad?" Rhonda groaned. "Of course, love." Kai put his arm back around her. "You can have whatever you want. I'm sorry I was insensitive earlier." "You're fine, Kai." Rhonda shook her head and sighed. "It's me that's the problem. I'm so grumpy and pregnant." Where was I? Kai reached over and placed his hand on her little belly and grinned at her. "You have every right to be grumpy. You have to put up with me every day, after all." "I don't have to." Rhonda paused. "I could send you packing back to Derby." "But who would hold our son when you're tired?" Kai feigned insult. "Did you find out that it's a boy?" Megan turned to Rhonda. "He just thinks it is." Rhonda smiled over at her. "We're only about 16 weeks along, so they won't do another ultrasound for a couple more weeks." Rhonda looked back over at Kai and winked at him. "I know he's a boy." Kai leaned closer to her. "I can feel it in my heart." He ignored the fact that there were others at the table and kissed her with a little more passion than was publicly acceptable. "Break it up, guys," Ed said. "You're making all the ladies in the room uncomfortable." "Nah," Ian dismissed Ed's assessment. "All the ladies in the room are just jealous and wondering how they can get a passionate kiss from Kai Burton. Am I right, Teresa?" He looked up at their server with a teasing grin. "That is a trap," Teresa said, a grin spreading across her face, "and I am not answering it." Everyone at the table laughed along, and she started turning red in the face. Ian reached over and fist bumped Kai and then Ed. The girls just sort of shook their heads and chuckled. "You do realize that every time you make us laugh, your tip goes up, right?" Ian asked. "Again, I am not answering that, Mr. Ian. I am ready to take your order, sir." He smiled up at her and stopped teasing her long enough to get some entrees ordered. When she typed everything into her little computer and ducked out of the room, Ian took a moment to look around the table at his group. This whole going out without a bodyguard thing is kind of fun, Ian said. Excuse me, Ed cleared his throat. Have I been let go? You're on a date, Ian shook his head. It doesn't count. You're off duty. I should be on a date more often, Ed grinned and wrapped his arm around India. This whole off-duty thing is kind of nice. I could probably accommodate you on that one. India blushed and looked up at Ed through her eyelashes. A little girl of about 4 walked up to the table with a napkin in her hand and a pen. She nervously snuck up next to Ian and placed the napkin in front of him. Well, hello there, little miss. Ian glanced down at her. How can I be of service? My mommy wants you to write your name on this. She shrugged her little shoulders. I don't know why. I know why, Ian spoke very seriously to her. Because your mommy has superb taste in music. How can you taste music? The little girl creased her eyebrows. I like breadsticks. They all laughed with her, and Ian wrapped his arm around her shoulders affectionately. I like breadsticks too, Ian said. Could I borrow your pen? The little girl nodded and handed it to him with a sweet smile. What is your name? Ian asked her. Chelsea, the little girl responded. Ian quickly scrawled across the napkin. Chelsea, thank you for sharing your love of breadsticks with us. Ian Taylor. Would it be okay if my friends all signed it as well? Ian asked. She nodded, and Ian handed the pen and napkin around the table so that first Megan and Rhonda, then Kai and Ed signed the napkin. When it got around to India, she held the pen and looked up at Ian. Exactly why am I signing this? She asked. Because you are the most beautiful supermodel giraffe I've ever seen. Everyone at the table laughed, except Chelsea, who looked up at India with wide eyes. India grinned and shook her head, but signed the napkin and handed it over to little Chelsea. Thank you, Chelsea sang out and skipped back over to her mom and dad. Ian grinned and waved over to them. Shortly after, Teresa arrived with breadsticks, salad, appetizers, and eventually entrees. The group laughed and ate and enjoyed an evening out. Finally, Rhonda was yawning, Kai was mildly inebriated, and Ed looked like he was ready for a goodnight kiss from India before starting their date all over again the next day. After signing his name to deduct the meals from his new credit card, Ian leaned over to Megan and whispered in her ear, Want to go home? Or across the street to the hotel? Megan raised her eyebrows, pulled her keys from her purse, and wrinkled her nose. I think we've spent enough time in hotels. Let's go home. And that is the end of chapter 11. The next time we will read chapter 12, which is called Driving Me Crazy. But before we do that, I want to mention this new anthology that just came out. It's called Unspoken Words. And one of the books inside, one of the short stories inside this book contains the story of Ed and India. It goes a little bit further into the story, and it is on page 92. And it is called Buxton Peak, Silence from Nashville. It actually takes place during the time period within Buxton Peak Book 3, the end of the beginning. And I'll mention that again when I get to that part. But I want to just put a plug in for this really cool book. It's actually by the LDS Beta Readers group, which is a group that I'm part of on our website and Facebook. Excuse me. It has a lot of great authors that I love, the little short stories that are in there. So I highly recommend it. It's called Unspoken Words. And it's a collection anthology of short stories. So, okay, so next time we get on this video, we will be reading chapter 12 of Buxton Peak Book 2 Center Stage. And if you liked this video, I would love it if you would give it a thumbs up and like it and share it on social media and be able to share it with lots of people. So thank you, and we'll see you for the next chapter.